Hello, Tim from Fair Play Now on the 2nd of September 2021. Thought I'd just have a little talk about something that happened to me best part of 20 years ago, little conversation I had, and boy oh boy did this teach me a lot about human psychology. Basically what it was, I was working at this freight company at the time. It is before I got into property maintenance and electrician work, and back in those days I drove lorries, and it made me in the sort of transporting air freight, that kind of world. I was doing a bit of property maintenance as well, around and about, just to earn an extra few pennies. But during one slack little time in the middle of summer, I was talking to one of my workmates there, and we were talking about general stuff really. And he said, do you know what? One thing I'd really love to do is scuba diving. And I thought, well, that's cool. And it just so happened that at that point, I had kind of done my scuba diving qualification, PADI it's called, PADI, which is kind of the main scuba diving thing. And I only did it because a mate of mine at the time was an instructor. He'd just qualified as an instructor, and he wanted to have a bit of practice kind of instructing people to learn how to scuba dive. And I wasn't hugely interested in it, but I thought, well, why not? It's summer, it'd be a nice new skill to learn. And he said he'd do it for me at cost. I think at the time it was normally about 200 quid. And he said, yeah, I'll do it for 100 quid. And I thought, I went for it. So, with that in mind, I said to this guy at work, it's funny you should say that, because I know a bloke who's an instructor, and I can sort of put in a word that you're interested if you like, thinking I was helping this bloke out, and that he'd go, oh yeah, that sounds fantastic. But instead of that, he said, oh no, I couldn't do it. Not at my age. I mean, he wasn't much older than what I am now. I think he was 59 at the time. And he said, oh no, I'm far too old for it really. And I said, well, the guy who did it, because when I did this thing with my mate, there was another guy there as well, and he was 70, in his early 70s. And I said, well, the guy I trained with was in his 70s, so you no need to worry about your age. And I thought that would kind of set his mind at rest. But then he sort of said, oh no, it's going to be really expensive, I can't afford it, not on my wages. And I said, well, this bloke is pretty reasonable, and I'm sure if I put in a good word for you, he'll give you a good discount. So I was trying to remove that barrier, and I did. What I was doing is I was removing barriers. So I removed the age barrier first of all, and then I removed the cost barrier. But then instead of sort of him saying, oh all right then, maybe I'll sort of give this bloke a ring then. No, he kind of then came out with a third thing, and it was something that I just couldn't argue with. He said, oh no, I don't really want to take the risk. I've got children, I've got grandchildren, and I don't want to be putting myself at risk, and having them sort of losing their sort of granddad sort of thing. And I could have argued, well, when you do scuba diving properly with a proper instructor and you get the PADI qualification, it's kind of one of the safest things you can do really, almost. But I thought, nah, this bloke just doesn't want to do scuba diving, not really, not in real life. He had it set up in his mind, you see, as a kind of a nice little fantasy, I suppose you could call it. Just a nice little dream where you could sort of think, yeah, you know, maybe one of these days when I'm kind of retired in Spain and I'm living in the sun, maybe I'll do a nice bit of scuba diving. But you kind of knew he'd never do it really. And I'm sure 20 years later, he never got around to doing it. And I just thought that was so fascinating. He just had this fantasy in his head, but he didn't want the fantasy to become reality, and that is why he was putting up all of these kind of barriers in my way. And when I demolished one, he'd just come out with the next one and then the next one. And I think that is what we're up against when you try and argue something, and you know the kind of thing that the likes of us would be arguing with the likes of other people. There's just no arguing with them because they've got this thing in their head, they think a certain way, and they just do not want that kind of interrupted or challenged in any way. And if you do try and challenge them on it, they'll sort of put up these barriers in your way, and when you sort of collapse the first one or go around the first one, they won't just sort of turn around and go, oh yeah, you know what, yeah, I think you're right, yeah, I've been wrong all these months and years, and you're right. No, they're not going to do that. They're just going to put up the next barrier and then the next barrier, and each one just becoming more and more irrational. And then as you demolish them, and they'll just retreat into a completely irrational sort of zone, just as this bloke did really. So I think that was a highly educational little episode that happened to me 20 years ago, and it kind of really explains human psychology, both as far as that was concerned and also as far as this situation we're in now is concerned. And you just cannot argue with really deep-seated psychological beliefs with reason and facts and even scientific proof. And it doesn't matter how rational you are, you'll just never argue against it. And I think that's why they talk about this, the dinner party principle. You don't talk about, at dinner parties, if you're around strangers, you don't talk about three things. You don't talk about sex. Well, that's slightly different because people are often obviously offended by you talk about that. But you don't talk about religion, and you don't talk about politics, because there's no kind of arguing with people against their kind of religious and political beliefs. You'll never change their mind, and all you'll do is get into a big old argument with them. And which is why I didn't push it any further with this guy at work with the scuba diving, because I knew if I started pushing it any further, he'd start getting a little bit hacked off with me. So that's why I backed off then. So yeah, that was a really, really fascinating kind of episode, and very, very relevant for what we face right now. Tim from Fair Play Now, thanks for watching.